Hello class, I hope you're all doing well. Today we're going to learn about some factoring techniques. So I want you to start a KWLS chart and write one thing you know about factoring and one thing you want to know about factoring. And go ahead and take a minute to do that. Alright, if you haven't finished writing that stuff down, go ahead and pause the video and come back. You will want to save this. You will be using it for the rest of the lesson, and you will be turning it in tomorrow during class. So we're going to start with a method called the difference of squares. And again, this is simply a method of factoring, but it is a very specific type. So it always has to be in the form of a squared minus b squared. We have something squared minus another something squared, hence the title difference of squares. So when we factor something like this, it's always going to be in the form of a plus b times a minus b. Now the plus and the minus can go in either place as long as it's a and b, plus and minus doesn't matter which way it goes, as long as there's one plus and one minus. So if you don't believe me, let's check our work, and we can check that by FOILing, which is something we learned last week. So I would do my first, which is a times a, which is a squared. I would do my outsides, which would be a times negative b, which would be minus ab. And then I would do my insides, which would be b times a, which we'll just call plus ab. And then we would do our last, which would be b times negative b, which would be minus b squared. Now the nice thing we see is our middle terms cancel out to be 0. We have negative ab plus ab. So those just cancel, we'll cross them off, and we're left with a squared minus b squared. So we just showed that a squared minus b squared is equal to this factoring. A plus b times a minus b. So isn't that fancy? Move that over for you guys a little bit. So now we just realized the method of the difference of squares. So I'll go ahead and have you pull out your KWLS chart and write one thing you've learned so far about factoring. All right. If you haven't finished, go ahead and pause it and come back. But we're going to work on an example next. Now, if you're looking at this, you might say, well, this is not in the form that we had. But if we look, the square root of 1 is still 1. So we can rewrite this problem as x squared minus 1 squared. And now it's in the form a squared minus b squared. And in this case, our x is going to be our a, and 1 is going to be our b. So I can rewrite this as x plus 1 times x minus 1, just like we had before. Now, because we are good algebra students, we will always check our work by FOILing it back out and making sure it works. So if I do my first, x times x, which is x squared, my outsides, which is negative 1 times x, so we get a minus x. We do our insides, so we get a 1 times x, so that's plus x. And if we do our lats, we're going to get 1 times negative 1, which is a minus 1. And again, we see this niceness where negative x plus x just goes away because it equals 0. So we get x squared minus 1, which is what we started with. So we know that x squared minus 1 is equal to x plus 1 times x minus 1. And we have therefore just factored x squared minus 1. So let's look at another example with a little bit different numbers. So we have x squared minus 4. Now again, you're probably saying it's not perfectly in the form of a squared minus b squared. So we want to change this up a little bit. So I would say, well, the square root of 4 is equal to 2. So I can rewrite this problem as x squared minus 2 squared. And now it's in our pretty form of a squared minus b squared. So we can write that as x plus 2 times x minus 2. And again, because we're awesome algebra students, we are going to go through and FOIL it real quick. So we would do our firsts, which would be x times x, which is x squared. Our outsides gives us negative 2x. Insides gives us a positive 2x. And our lasts give us negative 4. So then again, our middle terms cancel out to be 0, and we get x squared minus 4. So we just checked it here, and we know that the factoring is equal to x plus 2 times x minus 2. So all we do is we take the square root of whatever this number is, pop it in for b, do a, b, 1 plus, 1 minus, check our work, and then we just factored. So let's go ahead and write one more thing that we have learned about factoring so far. And I'll give you a couple seconds to do that. All right, again, if you haven't finished, go ahead and pause and come back. We're going to look at one more example of factoring using the difference of squares. So again, I hope you're noticing a pattern. This one is not perfectly in a squared plus b squared form. So what do you notice about this problem? What I notice is I have a 3 in front of here, where all of our other numbers in front of the x squared have been 1. So I kind of want to get rid of that in a sense. So I'm noticing that there's a 3 and a 3 here. So I can pull out the greatest common factor. So if I pull the 3 out, I'm left with 3 times x squared, because 3x squared, if I pull a 3 out, I'm just left with x squared. If I pull a 3 out of this, I'm just left with a minus 1 as a placeholder. And if I distributed that back in, I could check it and I would get this here. So now I'm seeing something familiar. Now we've already factored this down. So we know that x squared minus 1 is really x squared minus 1 squared. And our 3 is just going to come along for the ride. And if I factor this x squared minus 1 squared down, I'm going to get x plus 1 times x minus 1. And the 3 again is just coming along for the ride. Now, like we said before, if I were to FOIL this back out, I would get the I would get the x squared minus 1 because we did that earlier. And you can rewind and look at that if you want to. And then if I were to do that, so if I were to FOIL that all out, I would get x squared minus x plus x minus 1. And then my middle terms cancel out. So I'm left with x squared minus 1. And the 3 comes along for the ride. And then if I distribute the 3 back in, I get the 3x squared minus 3, which is what we started with. So this is our factoring of 3x squared minus 3. So we can say that 3x squared minus 3 is equal to 3 times x plus 1 times x minus 1. So sometimes, if it's in the form of something like this, you have to look for the greatest common factor to pull out, and then you will be able to use the difference of squares on what's inside of here. So that's it for today. So I want you to write one thing you still want to know about factoring. And then once you're done with that, you are free to rewatch the video if you need to. And we'll have some practice problems tomorrow in class. So good luck, and I hope you have a nice night.